Without further ado, I'll move on and introduce John. John, who is one of our esteemed members and has talked for us before on other subjects, uh, the an expert on the alignment of Roman roads and how they were surveyed and laid out. But here we are on something slightly different. I believe from a previous conversation I've had with John that he has some past in Leicester and some affinity and some recollection of it, which may come out in the next few minutes. And he's always been interested in this feature that runs into the centre of Roman Leicester. So without further ado, I'll stop screen sharing the splash screen and uh, pass it over to John to put his screen sharing up, and over to you, John.
Right, hello everybody there. This talk is about the case for a possible Roman canal, which Steve Mitchell and I believe ran into Leicester, Roman Leicester. There. Nearly all of this work, the investigative work, has been done by Steve Mitchell over a sustained programme of more than 20 years investigations there. My own involvement with this work really started in 2021. And most of my contribution has been assessing the water engineering aspects of all the claims that Steve has been making for this possible canal there. I did qualify as an engineer. I'm a chartered engineer, so I think I know something about the engineering aspects. Whereas Steve, I think, would probably admit that he's not got any great feel for water engineering. But as it happens, all the conclusions he reached, I found were valid there. Now, so this article has already been published in full in the third volume of Itinera, the Journal of the Roman Roads Research Association. But importantly, that article, although it goes into quite a bit of detail, Steve had done much more detailed work than that article reports. And so Steve has produced a detailed account of his investigations, which is on the Roman Roads Research Association website. And the link to it is from the introduction to the article published in Volume 3 of Itinera. Both the article and Steve's detailed account are now readily accessible, downloadable free of charge from the Roman Roads Research Association website. So if you want to follow up what has been published, then you can do so very easily, I think. There's also David Ratledge produced a LiDAR flyover of the course of the possible canal. He didn't try to chart the course of the canal precisely, but essentially he flew over approximately where we believe it ran, and his LiDAR flyover stops and pauses at where the evidence is clearest, just to point out the evidence, just to show people where to go and look if they want to see for themselves there. So why this talk? Well, it's really an opportunity to explain our thinking perhaps in more detail. But before I begin with, let me just show people who perhaps not familiar with the British Isles where Leicester is. As you can see here, it's pretty well in the middle of England. It's the town of Leicester, and it's a Roman town in the Roman period. And the other place I'll be mentioning as a Roman town is Dorchester down here. There is another Dorchester just south of Oxford, which also was a Roman town. But the one to which I'm referring is this one in Dorset here, down near the coast. Well, this sums up what we've found, and I'll return to this slide at the end of the talk. But just to get people's bearings, this is the centre of Leicester, the city of Leicester nowadays. But most of these estates out here are all part of Leicester itself nowadays. And here is the old village of Aylstone there, which is now effectively a southern suburb of Leicester. But these are some of the other villages I'll be mentioning in the course of the talk. There's Whetstone, there's Enderby, there's Croft, Stony Stanton, and this place without a name called Huncote. There have been quarries there at the time. There. The line of this railroad here, this is the Fosse Way the Roman road running into Leicester. There. This is a modern or more recent diversion, but you see it runs directly into Leicester here on this line there. And along here, the River Soar is running, trickling along in all kinds of directions. It's running there and so on, up to here, so on there. And also we have another waterway marked on here, which is the Grand Union Canal, which runs here from Daventry Way, London ultimately, and it runs here into the Soar Valley. And just at this point, which is very important, the River Soar runs directly into the Grand Union Canal, and the pair of them then run as a single waterway into Leicester there, which is canalised, but essentially it's a single waterway with the Soar and the Grand Union Canal running together. And that's actually quite important from the investigations we carried out there. This is also the location of what is called the Raw Dykes, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute or two there. But this is key to our interpretation of the possibility that this was a canal there. We think the canal ran all the way into almost the centre of Leicester to where the Roman public baths were. They're now called the Jury Wall Baths there. And neither Steve nor I believe that the course of the canal, Roman Canal, which we show on black here, actually stopped at the Fosse Way. But Steve's got some interesting ideas of what might have happened after that, as we think it approached Croft and possibly Stony Stanton there. Some ideas there. We'll come back to those at the end of the talk there. Anyhow, let's begin with principles there. What's the difference between an aqueduct and a canal there? Well, an aqueduct slopes gently downwards so that water runs down it under gravity. And it's preferable to have the slope fairly constant there, because if you change the slope, say for instance you went horizontally here for a bit, water would gather at this port and then overflow the edge of the aqueduct. So it pays to have your aqueduct sloping gently but consistently downwards. A canal runs on the level, and the water in the canal is still there. The water in the canal is normally used for floating boats, for transport, carrying goods and people. So that's the general difference here. Now let's look at an aqueduct, a Roman aqueduct, that was discovered only in the 1960s. This is what is known as the Lune Gorge. It's a cleft in the hills between Keswick and Carlisle in northern Britain, and almost everything goes through it. It's where the River Lune, up here in black, runs down towards outlet at the sea at Lancaster. But this white track here is a modern track on top of the Roman main road from Ribchester up to Kirby Thor and then on to Carvoran near Hadrian's Wall. And that is effectively the Roman M6. It's the main Roman road on the western side of the country, corresponding with Deer Street on the eastern side of the country. Now this yellow-looking strip here is the main West Coast railway line from London to Glasgow, which also runs through the gorge. And as you can see here, this is the M6 motorway, also running through the gorge. And there was an earlier main road, the A685, from Kendal to Kirby Stephen and Brough on the Stainmore Pass, which also runs through the Lune Gorge there. The hillside here is sloping straight down, and this aqueduct here is sloping across it, wiggling a bit to maintain a steady gradient. Now, how can we tell that this is Roman? Well, it's self-evident really, because there is the Roman fort of Low Boroughbridge, and that's exactly where this aqueduct is heading. Of course, it's been cut by the main modern road and the M6 and the motorway and the railway as well. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear that's what it's doing there. The auxiliary fort, the fort here at Low Boroughbridge here was an auxiliary fort, and so it probably housed something of the order of 500 or more soldiers there, which is a smaller population than that of what Roman Leicester would have been when it had grown in size there. So let's just hop across the channel and have another look at a more famous Roman aqueduct. This is the Pont du Gard in southern France. It's a massive Roman aqueduct. In actual fact, it's strictly an aqueduct bridge because the aqueduct itself ran for 30 miles from a spring at Uzès in France down to the Roman city of Nîmes there. And it's perhaps the most famous Roman aqueduct of all there on that. But it's an aqueduct bridge. The aqueduct itself is 30 miles long there. Now, the aqueduct water, the water in the aqueduct, runs across the top of this thing, just above the top of all these arches there. So in this space here. And it's quite small, despite the massive size of this. This is 153 feet high, which is extremely high, probably as high as the Romans could have built it there. And it's just one of dozens and dozens of bridges along this aqueduct. This is easily the biggest one. Now, the channel in this top half is actually quite small. Here we are. It's only about 5 feet high and about 4 feet wide. There was a flat slab on top there. I was last there in the 1990s, which is where those pictures came from. And at the time, you could actually walk across it there. In fact, I think you can see some people doing that, brave souls, because there's no barrister or anything or chains to hold you back. So if you lost your footing or was a strong gust of wind, you'd be blown over badly. But also, for most of the way, you could actually walk inside it as well. Most of the channel is still there. This sediment here is because the water in the aqueduct was actually very limey. And so over the centuries, when it was running, it created this deposit. Now, this next slide shows where that aqueduct from Uzès comes out into Nîmes. And it comes out in what is called a castellum divisiorum there. You can see the water came out through this hole here and then was distributed by various pipes going through these holes to various properties in the city. They're presumably the people who paid for it. Now you can see that the channel is only about 2 to 3 feet high. The base of it's just out of sight, just behind here, but it's only about 2 or 3 feet high. And it's only about 1.5 feet wide. So that's all you need to carry all that water there from the aqueduct into Nîmes. So again, aqueducts don't need to be big things as a rule in area. Mind you, it has to be said that the Nîmes itself has copious freshwater springs. And so essentially this was just a supplementary supply to the city. Anyway, back to Britain. And a Roman aqueduct has been discovered fairly recently running into the Roman town of Dorchester. That's the one I pointed out on the map a bit earlier. A fellow called Bill Putnam discovered it. And Steve has made a sketch of the section drawn from illustration that was published of the article in Current Archaeology magazine. And you can see that it's a wood-lined channel there, about 1 foot or so deep and about 1.5 feet across. That's all there. And that carried the water to the town of Dorchester. Dorchester is thought to have been about the same size as Roman Leicester, although it's not been anywhere near as thoroughly excavated. So there's a certain amount of speculation there. But anyhow, so when somebody tells you that this is the raw dikes, somebody tells you that this is an aqueduct feeding Leicester, then it's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, look at the size of it. This is known as the raw dikes, and in fact, it's a massive ditch between a double ditch, between double banks. One bank here, one bank there, and the ditch in between there. It's known as the raw dikes, as that sounds as if it's plural. The dikes presumably refer to the banks on either side. Now, this is all that's left of the raw dikes there in today, because most of it, it used to extend for hundreds of yards towards the city. We're looking towards the city here, towards the north. And it was mostly filled in and flattened in the 18th century, unfortunately. So this is all we have left of it. And I'll be pointing out this tree to a slide later on, just so you can see the end of the raw dikes. Anyway, here's the raw dikes showing on this map here, raw dikes. In fact, the only bit that's left is the bit where under the word raw. Dikes is where it used to run, there. And it used to run all the way up to the infirmary before it was flattened. So it had quite a long way up here, has been demolished in the 18th century there. A consulting engineer called Stephen Kay, I hope that's pronounced correctly, it's Keay, in the 1930s, yes, 1930 it was. He was also an amateur archaeologist, and he made the interesting suggestion that the raw dikes there had been part of an aqueduct which had fed water to Leicester's large public bath, which is just up here in this white area just here. That's the Jury Wall baths there. So his suggestion was that the aqueduct had run along here, roughly along the 200-foot contour to the infirmary, then run alongside Oxford Street, which is this Oxford Street here in Leicester, and then carried on, now lost, and finished up in a canal basin at the Jury Wall baths there. The Roman Forum, by the way, was being built at the same time as the baths, very close to it, just about here. So the Forum was very close to Leicester's public bath. This is what's left of the Jury Wall now, Jury Wall baths. This is the Jury Wall itself. It is Roman, and it's about 30 feet high. It's thought to have survived because it had been part of a later post-Roman building, and they carried on using the wall rather than demolishing it. But the rest had all been demolished, and it's been largely consolidated down here by the Ministry of Works following Kathleen Kenyon's excavations here. But anyway, that's the Jury Wall. This is the Church of St Nicholas, standing right behind it. I believe it's an Anglo-Saxon church, although I do understand that the tower here is thought to be early Norman, but it looks very Saxon. But the church itself, I believe, was Saxon. So quite a holy area. Right, now Kay also made the suggestion that the proposed aqueduct, this running up here, had been fed from a stream called the Knighton Brook. Now the Knighton Brook is down here. After this, nowadays it runs underground, but it used to run down to the River Soar just here. And Kay proposed that it had kept more or less, the aqueduct had kept more or less to the 200-foot contour all the way along here. Well, there's two things wrong with this. First of all, Oxford Street, just here, rises quite significantly. It's quite a steep rise, and water doesn't flow uphill. Although that, of course, is the modern street level, and it's possible that an aqueduct could have run at a lower level at this top end here. But the second point is that aqueducts don't follow contours. They cross contours because they're on slope. And an engineer, Kay, should have understood that, and I thought it was rather strange. But on the other hand, a canal could have run level from here all the way up to, as Kay had suggested, all the way up to the Jury Wall site here, there. And it was this possibility, the size of the raw dikes and the fact that it follows approximately the 200-foot contour there, that led both Steve and myself to consider that it was more likely that the raw dikes had been part of a Roman canal rather than just an aqueduct. So that was a key starting point for us. But there's a twist, because when Kathleen Kenyon stuck a trench across the raw dikes, this is what she found. This is the shape of the dikes as shown on the picture just now. It's padded beneath very thickly with brown clay, but at the bottom here there's a notch. Now you don't need a notch at the bottom of a canal, and the size of this notch would have been about right for an aqueduct if they had, rather like the size of the one going into Dorchester. So Steve compared the possible aqueduct at in the raw dikes, the bed of the raw dikes, with the Dorchester one, and there's his comparisons. This is a Dorchester one, this is a Leicester one. He sees the Leicester one as being, or Leicester possibility, as being rather bigger than the Dorchester one. And he works out it had perhaps nearly 3 times the volume of the Dorchester one. Well, that, of course, assumes it was always running right up to the top, which it may not have been there. Anyway, it's quite not dissimilar from the Dorchester one, and quite a small bit of structure. Now, Professor John Wacher of Leicester University was persuaded, I think, by this, that this had in fact been the bed of an aqueduct which had been in the raw dikes. And he suggested that the massive banks here, up here and here, were to cope with floodwater when the stream, the Knighton Brook, overflowed, and the water would carry on up there. But in practice, I mean, it's bad engineering. If this stream here overflowed just here, you wouldn't ship the overflow into Leicester, because if it topped over the banks, you'd flood the city. What you do is put a sluice in here so the excess water goes over the top, then down the old bed of the stream, down to the river here. So, we didn't agree with Professor Wacher on that one. But there's also another snag with the aqueduct idea. When Kathleen Kenyon excavated her trench, which is across here roughly, there, across the road, she found its level was too low to reach Leicester's public baths. The baths are fairly well elevated above the river here. And she proposed that whoever had planned the aqueduct had been incompetent. Well, that hadn't worried John Wager, because he pointed out the Romans had plenty of devices for lifting water to the height required. But Steve was suspicious, and he commissioned a professional surveyor, Richard Putt, to establish the correct level of the raw dikes, and it was to measure this again. And when Putt did so, he found that Kenyon's figures were more than 4.5 feet too low. What's more, at this new accurate height, a level canal could have run right up to the site of Leicester's baths here, there, and if the baths had been in construction there at the time. Well, enter LiDAR. David Ratledge very kindly provided these LiDAR heights, their ground heights, along the today's course of the raw dikes. LiDAR isn't just used for looking at things under the ground or on the ground. It can also be used for determining exactly how high somewhere is. So these are all meters above Ordnance Survey. So we've gone to meters now. But you can see that apart from this reading up here, which the modern day level is certainly a lot higher than this one here. As I said, the Oxford Street does rise quite prominently in modern day Oxford Street. But you can see that there's quite a dip just here. And in fact, I think this is the 200-foot contour here. And now if the had been a canal here, and it was sticking to the level, which it had to do as a canal, then it would have to have been built up here on quite a considerable embankment in order to get it across this dip in the ground here and get it to the infirmary, which we know it did once reach there. So thanks to David Ratledge, we got those figures there, and we may even have a glimpse of what that embankment may have looked like, because when William Stukely visited Leicester in 1722, he looked at the raw dikes. This is the bit that's still existing today. This is the bit that was all flattened on its coming its way to the infirmary. And you can see they're quite hefty banks here carrying it. And also, if you notice that the bottom of the raw dikes here is almost at the same level as the ground. This was used as a race course at one stage, apparently. Well, yes, a bit of caution here, though. You need to be careful of antiquarian prints like this, because they've been created by an artist and an engraver to Stukely's specification. He wouldn't have drawn that himself, I suspect. And they naturally have emphasised certain features which appeared to be his interest at the time there. Here's Ayleston Church, by the way, spelt Elston in there in the distance. That's when it was a village. So where does this leave things there? Well, both Steve and I consider that there had once been an aqueduct in this notch where Kenyon had excavated, but for reasons already explained, it would not have run on the level to Leicester's public baths. If it had been a true aqueduct, it would have sloped gently downwards from this point, and we speculate that it would have served an area between Leicester's West Bridge and Blackfriars. That's an area just up here, very close to the River Soar, just here. We believe the aqueduct would have served there, so we think it would have turned off and made its way across here, down, sloping gently downwards to get to this area of Leicester. Dr. Graham Appleby, Leicester City archaeologist, was very helpful to us when in bringing us up to date with some of the latest archaeological findings from Leicester. These included indications that the earliest settlements of the Roman town had been up here, close to the river, much closer than the public baths later there, and included indications that they'd found an apsidal building there, together with a bathhouse, but a bath and a hypocaust there in those settlements. Steve and I also concluded that at this particular point where Kenyon excavated, the aqueduct had been filled in, or possibly already fallen out of use, and that a much larger canal had then been built above it. They're using the existing earthworks to form the raw dikes as visible today. So it started as an aqueduct, yes, okay, turned off and went over here, and later was then reused, filled in, if it wasn't still open, filled in, and then used as the bed of a canal, running all this way on the level up to the raw bath. Yeah, and more recently, AOC Archaeology have excavated the course of the raw dikes where it had been flattened. I think they excavated about here, there. And in their excavation, there was no trace whatever of the Kenyon's notch. So this seemed to suggest that the aqueduct had already turned off by then and had quit the line of the later canal, as Steve and I had conjectured. So why should the Romans, it seems, have replaced a reasonably sized aqueduct with a much larger channel, apparently capable of running on the level into the centre of the Roman town, where the public baths appeared to have been under construction at the time? Well, Steve obtained this petrographic survey of the Jury Wall from a professional petrologist, Dr. Diane Sutherland. And you can see here that the construction started with a mixture of Mount Sorrel granite from Mount Sorrel, and rock from southwest Leicestershire. This is the pale green stuff. And then there were tile courses, typically Roman, but gradually the use of the Mount Sorrel granite faded out. And eventually the course of it above more tile levels was a mixture of rock from southwest Leicestershire and Charnwood slate. So the construction started using Mount Sorrel granite, and had then tapered off and then switched much more to rock from southwest Leicestershire and Charnwood Forest. So, although the course of the raw dikes is not proven or not recorded north of the Royal Infirmary, it seems very plausible that Romans had indeed constructed a level canal to ship rock from quarries in southwest Leicestershire in order to support the construction of the Roman town's public baths and also its forum close by. I was pointing that out a bit earlier. The need was there, and the Romans would certainly have been capable of constructing this. And as a bonus, water could easily be tapped from the canal afterwards in order to supply the baths once construction had ceased and the baths had been brought into commission. But where would the water have come from to fill a canal this big? The Knighton Brook certainly wouldn't have been able to up that task in normal conditions. The only feasible source would appear to have been the River Soar itself. And how and where could the river have been tapped so as to fill this canal. We're now jumping to south of Ayleston. There, let's tidy the paperwork up. And this ditch was found by Steve in 2002. It's in a field. This hedge line is where the Grand Union Canal runs. It's the other side of the hedge. You can't see it from here, but it's down beneath the hedge there. But this ditch, as you can see, has a very similar profile to the raw dikes, and if you allow for some silting, it's actually very similar in proportion as well, the profile there. This field was owned by a Mr. Grimmer, apparently, and so Steve named the field as Grimmer's Field. We'll use that name a few times. Now I'll switch to a clip from David Ratledge's LiDAR flyover. Here's the Grand Union Canal running along here. And there's that ditch in Grimmer's Field. This black line is a footpath, which unfortunately shows up very strongly. It's a former footpath anyway. The ditch itself is there. And you can perhaps see that the bridge and furrow runs down here and stops at the edge of the ditch. Here it does cross the line of the ditch there. But it doesn't continue between the ditch and the Grand Union Canal, which suggests that this ditch was there before the bridge and furrow. And it wasn't part, therefore, of the construction of the canal or this is what's left of the Great Central Railway line, which ran from Leicester to Rugby and then down to London Marylebone. So, potentially it could have been a quarry for either the canal or the railway, but it looks as if the bridge and furrow was later than the ditch there. And that's the ditch in Grimmer's Field, as David's pointed out, David Ratledge. Here's the River Sorway wriggling its way along beneath the canal. Now, this is the Environment Agency's LiDAR picture of the same ditch. And here it is. Here's the Grand Union Canal running along here. And this is the ditch itself. You can see it's on a collision course with the canal, and so the canal would have destroyed anything that the Romans had built here. But you see the ridge and furrows again stopping short of the ditch. Here and there it does run up to the edge of it, apparently, and here it does cross it, but here it does seem to stop earlier, again indicating that the ridge and furrow, we think, was earlier. These are some earlier courses the river saw, where it's been canalised at times. But the Grand Union Canal is this one here. Anyhow, so LiDAR can, of course, produce sections of things as well as the height of things. So we asked Dave Armstrong if he could produce a section of that, and Dave very kindly did. Here's a section just across where those arrows are. And this is what we found. Here's the level of the level of water of the Grand Union Canal, showing up on LiDAR at the surface level. And here's that earthwork, the ditch in Grimmer's Field. And you can see it looks bigger than the Grand Union Canal. And it's at the right level, 60.5 OD, meters OD, which is the same as the raw dikes there. To us it looked fairly convincing. That was part of the same structure. Now, this picture was taken by Steve from a hang glider, would you believe it, at about the year 2000. I think that's when there's a bad outbreak of foot and mouth disease. So Steve couldn't get into the fields. And so he managed to get a friend to take him up in a hang glider and took this aerial photo shot. You can see here the River Soar wiggling its way along here. Okay. And here's the Grand Union Canal, standing rather above it there. And this is the old Great Central Railway running along here. But you can see here the River Soar, having kept to the eastern side of the valley, this is looking south over here, then cuts across the valley to take to the west side of the valley and carry on as wiggling on the west side of the valley. And I think that's quite important. And we think that it's about here where the River Soar was tapped off to feed the Roman Canal, because the Soar here is at about the right level. It's descending from south to north, was at about level of the raw dikes and the ditch in Grimmer's Field. There. But the question is, but those figures we have from Grimmer's Field and also from the raw dikes are today's figures. So what was the level of the River Soar in Roman times? Well, this is where this junction with the River Soar with the Grand Union Canal becomes very important, because this here is the Grand Union Canal running along. You see the lock there, King's Lock it's called, and it runs here. And here is the River Soar running very close to it, descending there. And at this point, just below the lock, the River Soar runs into the Grand Union Canal, and the pair of them then run together, although it's called the River Soar, they then run together as a single waterway into Leicester. You can see it was canalised, another lock there, and carried on there. Now, at this junction, there's a line going across here, but that's the footpath shown on the Ordnance Survey map. There's actually no sluice, no lock, nothing at all. The river just flows naturally into the Grand Union Canal at that time without any hindrance at all there. And yet the level of the canal, when it was being first dug in 1793, would have been controlled by that lock here. So all the water here would be at the same level. And therefore, the level of the River Soar at that time, in 1793, would have been the same level as the Grand Union Canal is today. Well, let's take a look at that junction. This is looking at the canal is coming this way through here and, sorry, this way, running through over here. The River Soar is joining the canal under this towpath bridge, wooden towpath bridge there. And you can see, though, the water's slightly disturbed, but there's no eddies, there's no whirlpools, there's no problems at all. The water's just joining quite naturally from the river into the canal, and then the pair of them flow and then towards Leicester as a single waterway. This is, of course, when the Great Central Railway was still running there. I'll return to this junction shortly, because it really is quite remarkable, I think. It's crucial to what we think the Romans were doing as well there. However, just before we get to that junction, the River Soar was crossed by this packhorse bridge, which is thought to have been built between 1450 and 1540. And you can see that the arches are springing from the water level at exactly the same position as they would have been when the bridge was first built. There's no mudding or mudding up, there's no silting up, and there's no standing proud by scouring. So it looks as if the River Soar, they get conflicting elements of sifting and scouring have been cancelling each other out on this stretch of the River Soar since about since about 1450 to 1540 there. So, although it only takes us 1/4 of the way back to Roman times, 2,000 years ago, it does seem that the level of the River Soar in Roman times is likely to have been pretty much the same as it is today. In addition, though, to the River Soar, there's two special features about the River Soar to the south of Leicester, which make it a suitable source of water for a level canal. Firstly, it doesn't dry up even after long periods of drought. In 2022, Steve and I independently went down to have a look at the water level near this Packhorse Bridge, which is about here. We saw, to our amazement, that despite 3 months of no rain, almost 3 months of no rain, the water was still flowing as strongly and as deeply as normal there, and flowing this way into the canal. But secondly, when the Soar does flood, it floods very widely. You can see the width of the valley floor here, where they don't have buildings encroaching any closer than that there. But it rarely floods to more than 2 feet deep. Now, in the 1940s, I grew up in Leicester on this road here, Caldicot Road, And as kids, we used to walk down here, down Braunston Lane, and then down what we called Coal Pit Lane towards Ayleston mostly to go to the Ayleston playing fields just here. And this lane, I don't know if it's called Coal Pit Lane anymore now, but it was at the time, and it had alongside it, along this northern side, a timber pedestrian walkway, so that people could, when it flooded, which it did pretty well every year, people could walk through to Ayleston without getting, well, badly wetted anyway, in those days. So now, from memory, that walkway was raised only about 1.5 feet above ground level, which bears out the fact that the floodwater from the Soar, when it did flood, was never very deep. Now, it's a knowledge of these characteristics of the River Soar that enabled William Jessup, Britain's leading canal engineer at the time, in the 1790s, to make the audacious decision to plan for the River Soar to run without hindrance into the Grand Union Canal near Ayleston and then continue on as one waterway into Leicester. Now, you had to make that decision, you had to know what you're doing there. And Jessup certainly did, a great engineer. But the important point is that these properties need to have been understood by the Roman planner and surveyor as well, because otherwise you couldn't have relied upon the River Soar providing an adequate, dependable source of water to this possible canal. And this is how they think we think they coped with the rising water level at the raw dikes. Here's Kathleen Kenyon's section again. There, we estimate the normal water level from the River Soar would have allowed for a depth of about 2 metres and a width of 16 metres across here, wide enough to allow two boats to pass one another without any problems. But then we think the banks were sufficiently high, or built up high, to allow for a rise in water level of 1 metre, which should have been more than adequate for the rise of the River Soar at only 2 feet normally there. So we think that's how the engineer who planned this, who we believe planned this, allowed for this to work. This bank is probably natural. This one, as you can see, is built up to cope with the rise in the water level, which we're convinced the engineer would have understood about there. Yeah, so let's. So what we think may have happened is that in the Soar Valley, at the tapping point, which we showed on David Rattledge's LiDAR image, here's the River Soar wriggling along towards Leicester, and here's where it cuts across to the other side of the valley, the western side of the valley, still wriggling, dropping down from, well, the Fossway and from Croft possibly there. And that at this point, the level would have been correct for the level in the canal to be taken off. And then we see the canal there running off towards Leicester. And looking at it sideways, here you've got the gentle gradient coming down from the Fossway and Croft. And at this point, where the level is about correct for the canal will be taken off and run level into Leicester, whereas the rest of the river would have run down to the Less Bridge in Leicester, there in its normal path. And of course, once the canal had been filled up, there'd be no flow along the canal, there'd be still water. So the flow would essentially be kept, main flow would still have been running down the River Soar originally into Leicester. Yes. However, St John Old, by the way, is an abandoned church, and it appears to have had a Roman predecessor. And Steve has a hunch that the Romans may have had a wharf here about this place, which would allow them to load boats to go along this bit of the Soar and then along the canal into Leicester. There. And possibly, you say, this was a Roman building at one stage before it became a now abandoned church. However, Steve believed that there were likely to have been Roman quarries further to the southwest, that is more in the Croft, Stony Stanton, Huncote way there. And as can be seen, the Soar would have been no more navigable along here than it was along here. So how did the Romans, would they have tackled that? Well, we believe they'd have extended the possible canal to reach those places uh, um, by cutting a new course for the River Soar along here. So let's have a look at that. So we believe that from there they cut a new course for the River Soar that it would effectively have been a canal from the Croft, Stony Stanton, Huncote area, still leaving the original bed of the river running here. And St John Old is still there, but this time the being manually cut. We saw the canal as sloping down gently here to this point, where it merges with the existing course, the River Soar, and then of course separates again here, running into on a level into Leicester and continuing down the original course down to Leicester that way. However, if this had been a level canal all the way to the Fosse Way, because of the lie of the land, don't forget it's sloping this way towards Leicester. By the lie of the land, it would have got to about, in a cutting, 15 feet deep by the time it got to the Fosse Way, and there's no sign of anything like that. So it looks as if the Romans cut this as effectively as a canalised river there. So it was a canal, but on a slope there. And we believe that it was a part of the same construction there. Sorry, just checking my notes here. And quite remarkably, this artificial course of the River Soar, we believe is artificial course, appears to remain the main course of the River Soar until around this area, until the mid-1950s. Quite astonishing. Just to digress a minute, there are some examples of sloping canals. I've said they're normally a level, but there are some examples of them. There's a couple in Devon. One is the Tavistock Canal, which runs from Tavistock through a Wapping tunnel above Morwellam on the valley into the valley of the River Tamar. And the Can Quarry Canal, this is the Can Quarry Canal, and that runs from a quarry on the shoulders of Dartmoor down to a wharf on the River Plym to the east of Plymouth. And interestingly, this is designed to perform exactly the same function as our proposed Roman Canal, that is shipping rock downhill in loaded boats from a quarry to a wharf or basin, with the empty boats being towed back against the current. And the current here, this was, the canal was surveyed and designed by no less an engineer than John Smeaton, famous for building Eddystone Lighthouse. Well, it wasn't built until some years later by another famous engineer called J.M. Rendell. It had an average gradient of about 1 in 400, which is more than twice as steep as what we think the Roman Canal was cut at, which we think was about 1 in 900. There. So back to the Soar Valley there, and another clip from David Ratledge's LiDAR flyover. Here's the River Soar, cutting across the valley of the Soar and wriggling along its course over there. But here you can see signs on the LiDAR of an earlier cut there. And David's very kindly arrowed them so they stand out there. And this appears to show traces of what we think is that canalised river as it runs past the site of St John's at Alderby there. Now, from the LiDAR, the profile and dimensions of this apparently canalised river appear much the same as those of the proposed level canal running into Leicester through the Raw Dykes and also the ditch in Grimmer's Field. So it looks as if both canals could have been part of the same job, which would have made sense. So let's go back and look at a 1913 OS map, which shows the arrangement near Enderby, which is, oh, sorry, let me just go back in theory there. We're now jumping to just here, which is where Enderby Mill used to be there. And this slide is Enderby Mill there. And that mill, incredibly, remained in operation, not just standing there. It was in operation until 1957 when it was demolished. And according to the Domesday Book, Enderby had a mill in 1087. But of course, the book doesn't say where. It would have been a water mill, though, because windmills weren't introduced into this country until 100 or 200 years later. And looking at the countryside around Enderby, it would appear unlikely that Enderby Mill would have been located anywhere else than where it remained until 1957. There's no other obvious place where a water mill would have been placed there. And as such, it would have used the flow of this canalised river along here. And it is in the flow of the water of the river, which would, over the centuries, have silted up the course of the possible canal to the north of the road. So the canal went here and then continued originally, we believe, on this side of the road, approximately marked where that fence line is, but it all silted up there. So you could see that what had happened is that to get around this problem, because as soon as it silted up, the miller stopped working, the water wouldn't flow underneath there. So at some time or other, by 1913, this canalised river had been diverted, cut to run beside the road and flow into the old course, original course of the River Soar. So it's much wider after this. Um, and also a weir had been put in just here, so that when there was a flood and overflowing water, the overflow would go down the weir and go protect the old course of the Soar along here, and so protect the mill from flooding and damage caused by that. So we think this is what was the original Roman canal up to here, a cut built down here to take the water away so the mill could carry on working there. And that it was the flow of the water in the river which was driving the mill. Well, the next shot is taken here on this little bridge, looking this way, looking south at this canalised river. And what we think is a canalised river, you can see this is the waterway as it is today. And it's clearly a waterless riverbed that's been left there, short of water. I'll explain that in a tick there. Anyway, southwards from this point, from the point of view of the evidence of the canalised river, there are some remains, but they're too sketchy for me to deduce the water management arrangements. Although it does appear that the canalised river did extend at least as far as the Roman Fosse Way road, and well on its way to quarries near the villages of Croft, Huncote and Stony Stanton, as Steve had expected or suspected there. Now, what happened is that this weir today, well, when the mill was demolished in 1957, presumably, the weir was demolished. So the main flow of the river now runs up here and then down over this. You can see the demolished weir if you go there. It's quite clear there. The main flow now flows here in the old bed of the River Soar, and this effectively is almost waterless, as you saw from the previous picture there. So just to return to this picture of the thing of the canalised Soar as we saw it, it's pretty obvious this isn't a mill leat. Look at the size of it. It's obviously a recently dewatered riverbed. And if Steve and I are right, this is the remains of a Roman canalised river, still to be seen in Leicestershire today. But might this not be Roman, though? You see, more than 1,000 years will have passed between the arrival of the Romans and the creation of the Domesday Book. And we shouldn't dismiss the surveying skills and organisation abilities of the Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Scandinavian kingdoms that existed in between. For instance, Offa's Dyke is believed to be longer than Hadrian's Wall. Moreover, Leicester was one of the Vikings' 5 boroughs, and therefore an important town to them. In addition, in a recent book, Professor John Blair of Oxford University and his colleagues have shown that people in England were capable of planning and cutting canals of this size before the Norman conquest. So we can't know the answer for sure that it was Roman, although when Cassie Kenyon excavated the raw dike, she did find some pieces of Roman pottery, sufficient of them to convince her that Romans had been involved with the work. Further, in my opinion, as an engineer, and if our interpretation to be correct, whoever planned this layout for canalising the River Soar and tapping its waters into the possible canal into Leicester was definitely not a beginner. It does seem most probable, therefore, that the Roman canal was of Roman construction, and one of them had been planned and designed by a very accomplished engineer who really knew what he was doing, like William Jessup. But let's look at the dates during the Roman period. If there indeed had been an earlier aqueduct running down from the raw dikes over here over to this part of Leicester in the early days, it seems likely to have been in existence by 100 AD, to judge from the Roman finds, which have been recorded from that area. I have a hunch that the initial aqueduct, may have been built here for the Roman military, sort of a military bathhouse in that area, which would make a lot of sense there. Well, yes, but in which case it would have been, the aqueduct would have dated from much earlier in the 1st century AD. But John Waiter reports that work started on the jury wall baths just here, in about 145 AD, but there was then a hiatus in construction for about 5 years until building work resumed in about 155 AD. Now, construction of the possible Roman canal is likely to have taken up to 5 years, so this would fit a scenario in which construction of the baths had been started using granite from Mount Sorrel, but then shelved whilst the possible canal had been built, and then resumed with rock and slate, predominantly from southwest Leicestershire. So let's look at the raw dikes again today. This is an aerial view, courtesy of Google Earth. This is the raw dikes, and there's that tree at the end of the bit you can see today. And this is where the flattened bit ran here, alongside the Ayleston Road. Now, when Leicester's city archaeologist, Dr. Graham Appleby, kindly spent time with Steve and myself, he told us that he thought the raw dikes had once been part of a set of pre-Roman ramparts, like those in other important pre-Roman sites, such as Gosbecks near Colchester and Bagenden near Cirencester. Well, the name which the Romans gave to Leicester was Ratae Carial Torum. Ratae is apparently derived from a Celtic word meaning ramparts, and this Ratae Carial Torum would have been the ramparts of the Carial Tauri people, and there is some evidence about the dating of this nomination. For instance, a Roman soldier who was active in Rome's Dacian War around about AD 100 declared on his tombstone that he came from Ratae. In addition, a Roman milestone found near Leicester, eulogising Hadrian at a very early period of his reign, declared that it was 2 Roman miles to Ratae. It is thought to have been erected in advance of a possible visit by Hadrian to Leicester in 122 AD. So the name Ratae does appear to have come before the raw dikes as we see them today were constructed, and its possible canal construction as well. But there's also engineering reasons, you see, which support this. You see, if the Knighton Brook had been fed, as speculated by Stephen Kay, from the Knighton Brook into the aqueduct there, why wouldn't it have gone more or less straight over here, descending gently to get to that area? Why would it have turned northeast and run this way there? Well, unless the intention had been to save labour. In other words, if the raw dikes had already been there. And this would seem to support Graham Appleby's contention that the raw dikes had already been in existence as Ratae's ramparts when the Romans arrived. And if so, it would appear that the Romans had then made use of it, A, to conduct an aqueduct along its bed, and then B, to house a later transport canal within its standing banks. So that's the complete picture that we've uncovered there. And it shows where we've been and where we feel the Roman canal would have run. That's this black mark here, all the way up to the jury wall site here. But did it just stop at the Fosse Way? We suspect not, and Steve believes that it may have continued on as a canalised river to Croft and Stony Stanton. This is the River Soar here in its modern day form. But he believes that the canalised version may have continued on to Croft and Stony Stanton. There are some indication on LiDAR, which I don't find it very convincing, but there are possibilities there. But the alternative that Steve came up with is the whole area may have converted into an all year round Roman lake, using the Fossway as a dam. Now, the Fossway does seem to be very substantially built up just along here, in earlier times. And this area nearly always flooded. Well, in Roman times, it's almost perpetual flood, I think, there. Even in when Stukely was riding his horse along here, it was in flood at the time, and he reports that the water in the flood came up to his horse's belly, and he was on the Foss Way there. If it was, assuming he hadn't gone off the road there. So every time this was in flood, it was impossible to float loaded boats easily, just punt them across the lake. So why not turn it into an all year round lake by damming it there? Well, these are possibly wild possibilities, but we haven't been able to give them serious consideration. Neither of us feels we have the expertise necessary to really analyse that possibility. And second, the others will have. So good luck to them if people decide to look into that possibility. But is it possible that Hadrian did come to Leicester there, and that the idea for a canal came from him? We do know that Hadrian came to Britain in 122 AD. We don't know where he went, but it seems almost inconceivable that he wouldn't have gone north to see his wall being built between the Tyne and the Solway. He could have travelled there by sea, but Professor Mike Fulford recently published an article in the Journal of the Roman Society, Britannia, pointing out that Hadrian liked to travel across his empire, prompting improvements wherever he went. So here are some of the arguments there. The installation of a building boom in formerly moribund Leicester, because nothing was happening up to about 122. After that, it got going. The idea for a transport canal is likely to have been beyond the local imagination and ambition of the leaders there. There'd have been a need for imperial level surveying and planning. The skill of that whoever planned what I've interpreted from Steve's investigations was certainly a top guy. He really knew what he was up to. And there are possible contemporary waterways as well. There's one at the Foss Dyke, which links the River Trent to Lincoln. There, that shows some skilled surveying, and the Car Dyke, which shows exceptionally skilled surveying in Lincolnshire, because it appears to have been a catchment drain. They're diverting floodwaters away from the fens. So now, I thought that at least some of you might be amused by entirely fictitious playlet of what might have taken place between Hadrian and Ratai's elders, if Hadrian had indeed stopped at Leicester during his visit to Britain. I'll read them out because some of you might have small screens. But the local leaders saying, "Welcome to Ratai Cariol Tuorum, Your Imperial Majesty. We could not have been more honoured than by your presence there. Hadrian, thank you. Now then, I see that about 20 years ago, some of my men had laid out a complete plan of the roads and building sites for your new town." He means his soldiers. Apparently, before they left Leicester, they did lay out a grid for the Roman city there, which was higher up than the earlier settlement down by the River Soar. And this plan would include where the baths, the forum, and the basilica should go. So what progress have you made since then? A local leader, it's all been rather slow, Your Majesty. Oh, Hadrian, why is that? If you're hoping to become a civitas capital, with all the advantages that can bring, you better get a move on. Local leaders, we want to do things properly, but there is considerable difficulty in getting enough good quality building stone to the town. The best granite around here comes from Mount Sorrel, but transporting it here is slow and expensive. Hadrian, but I am advised that Mount Sorrel is right beside the River Soar. Why don't you ship it here along the river? What could be easier? Local leaders, unfortunately, Your Majesty, the river is not navigable, so we have to cart the stone overland to get it here. Oh, isn't there suitable granite elsewhere locally? The local leaders, yes, there are outcrops of granite to the west and southwest of Leicester, near Gruby, Enderby, Croft and Stony Stanton. We could quarry that, but again, we'd have the same problem of transport because the river just isn't navigable to the south of Leicester either. Hadrian, have you ever thought of building a canal? If you designed it right, it could bring your granite right into the centre of your town, just where you'd need it. Local leaders. Sorry. I have to skip the first line. Your Majesty, where the new baths are planned to be higher up from the river than where all of our bathhouses are at present. There was an aqueduct which once fed our bathhouses. It had been built by your troops for their bathhouse when they were here, but it has become blocked up since they left. Just a footnote here I'll read out. Steve is adamant that there is no conclusive evidence for a permanent Roman legionary presence in the town at that time. So that's just a hunch of mine, I'm afraid. Anyhow, but this aqueduct has become blocked up since they left. Hadrian, oh, why is that? Local leaders, our forefathers couldn't agree who should be responsible for keeping it running. Hadrian, how pathetic. I've just thought, if you're going to build a canal into the middle of Ratai, it could bring water to the baths as well. The water that the boats float on would be the same as the water in the baths. Hey, what a capital idea. I must pat myself on the back for coming up with that one. What do you think of it? Now, in fact, the second footnote is this is possibly a Hadrianic error because water tapped from an open transport canal is likely to be unsuitable for public bath suites. I mean, you wouldn't bathe in Leicester's open Grand Union Canal these days unless you had to. It's possible that Waiture's big drain, discussed above, might have been an attempt to get around the problem of stagnant water without nullifying the emperor's capital idea. Now, this big drain, John Waiture drew particular attention to a massive drain coping with huge quantities of water that ran beside Leicester's public baths. It didn't run into the baths, it ran beside them. And my suspicion is that this is an attempt by the engineer to avoid the water getting the canal becoming totally stagnant, which it would have done if it had been completely still, because the water tapped off into the baths would have been comparatively little compared with the water in the canal. However, you need to see a diagram of that, and it is explained in more detail in the report that's been published with a diagram. But that's what Waiture's big drain is, a rather mysterious thing, which obviously carried a huge amount of water. Anyhow, back to local leaders. A truly wonderful idea, Your Majesty. Who else would have thought of that? And Hadrian, tell you what, I'll send over one of my very top water engineers to plan it all out for you. He'll be coming across Britannia anyway because he needs to work on a catchment drain around the area of the wetlands further east, known as the Fens. That's the Car Dyke. What do you reckon to that then? A magnificent idea, Your Majesty. How could your divine generosity ever be refused? And the footnote says, it would have been well known that arguing with Hadrian could be bad for your health. Hadrian, great, that's fixed that then. What's for dinner? Well, I hope some of you might have found that amusing. It is, I have to stress, though, entirely imaginary, entirely fictitious. There's no record that Hadrian ever came to Leicester. Neither Hadrian nor Ratai's elders would have spoken English, nor would they have used English terms of phrase like tell you what. And thus the canal might not have been Hadrian's idea after all, but it has a whiff of it, I think. So what next? Well, here's another clip from David's LiDAR picture, video. Yes, we found our article in Itinera seems to have aroused little local interest. We couldn't get any mention of it in the Leicester Mercury, for instance, or even amongst the archaeological community, except for Graham Appleby, who was very complimentary, or with the general public. So this is, Leicester appears not to be interested in that. But neither Steve nor I have experience of archaeological excavation, but Steve would like to see some investigation, perhaps no more than auguring. Auguring is where you stick a lot of poles in the ground and see what the profile of the ground is underneath. He'd like to see this somewhere in this area, near St John Aldby. This would be to see if the profile is apparently similar to that of the raw dikes, which we would expect. But the other one, which occurs to me actually, is if this had been a Roman, had been a Roman canal, then I wonder if metal detecting would be of any use at all there. The detectors in the bed of the canal would have to be able to go down some way through the silt. So I don't know how powerful metal detector bits of kit are. But it seems to me that if boats were being hauled back empty alongside the river, which by our account there would have been along here and along here, then there ought to be Roman remains to be found along the banks of this bit of the river there. However, I've no experience of metal detecting, and so this may be a wild suggestion. I just don't know. At any rate, it's up to others to investigate who've got more experience than we have. Well, that's the end of the talk, folks. Thank you very much for watching and listening. There. As you can tell, I've been reading from notes, so I don't miss anything out or significant out anyway there. And I hope you've enjoyed it there. I'll now switch back uh, to Dave and Mike if he's there. And thank you for watching.
Well, thank you very much, John. That's been an interesting talk and postulation on what you think this might be. Now, while Susan is collating what questions we may have to pass on to me to put to you, I've got one of my own. And
Yes,
seeing as I'm doing this, I get the right to go first.
yes. Do I stop sharing now?
You can do it. It's entirely up to you, John. Yeah, but probably best to, yes.
Yeah. Okay, how's that? Yep.
My question is there any other examples of a canal such as this anywhere else, firstly in Britain or elsewhere in the empire?
Um, I believe, well, there are certain Roman canals, ship canals, or canals for boats in the Netherlands. One has recently been discovered there. There is quite a record of Roman canals in that book by John Blair on waterways in Britain. He lists, well, a fellow called James Bond, would you believe it? He lists all of the Roman canals, some of which weren't completed there. There was a canal apparently bypassing the iron gates on the Danube. And since the top, the entrance to that canal must have been at a higher level than the exit from it, I don't know how the Romans would have coped with that, because we don't know if the Romans had locks there. It's disputed. Some people believe they had locks or assume. I don't think it's generally accepted. And certainly that canal that I've been talking about into Leicester would have been no locks, no weirs, just straight waterway all the way through.
Okay, I've got some questions now from the
Yes.
audience, John. Uh,
Yeah.
from Penny.
Yeah.
Interesting that the possible Roman canal was on the same level as a more modern one. I forget which, sorry. It is likely that many canals from what we would consider the canal era were built at least partly on Roman channels.
I doubt that there. The first of all, the canal I was just well, I've been describing was only at one level where the river saw, as the river saw was descending towards Leicester. It wasn't the same level as the Leicester Canal. The Leicester Canal is about a foot or well, no, but it's about 7 feet lower in the middle of Leicester because it's a waterway still. It's still dropping.
Okay, another one from Penny.
Yeah.
Did Roman canals usually use straight sections like roads or not?
No, no, no. They would like it straight, but I mean, you've got to cope with the water. The water will take you in the same way Roman aqueducts, proper aqueducts. They're not often straight either because they had to cross natural features in a landscape, so they had to curve and twist and so on. There, it's just the roads where you can allow for going up and down. They can afford to go straight.
Okay, another one from Penny.
Yeah.
Might some smaller Roman roads actually have been some sort of a canal towpath?
Um, In the fens, there are some of the rodents in the fens, which are the waterways, are straight, and I think it is thought that yes, the towpath, if you like, there with the ram beside it would have been a Roman road. How well made it would have been, I don't know. But David Ratledge and a colleague has been doing some work on the fens, and there are clear areas of fenland where a road stops and a canal starts, because the only practical way to get carts across the peat was in a canal vote there. And then on the other side of the peat, the road starts again.
Okay.
That's due to be published. I don't know where David's going to publish that, but I've seen a draft of it.
I believe we're going to publish in an Itinera this year to
Oh,
come.
are you? Oh, right. Oh, good. Oh, that will be a great article. I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, buy your copy now.
One from Susan herself. Uh,
Yeah.
I can see how a canal to transport building materials would be required, but why build an aqueduct when there is a river they could draw water from?
Well, no, that's what I've been saying. They didn't build an aqueduct. They did draw water from the river. It's probably the interruption to the talk has probably not made that clear. I am sorry to everybody. That canal I'm talking about, running on the level into Leicester, was tapped from the River Soar. No aqueduct involved.
I thought you said there was an aqueduct channel in the bottom of it, though.
Oh yes, sorry. Yes. Oh yeah. Sorry, beg your pardon. That is thought to have been an earlier aqueduct that was fed from the Knighton Brook there. I wonder if I can. No, I won't try and go back there to the map. The Knighton Brook is well, it's south of the Raw Dykes, and it was on that 1 inch OS map I was showing there.
Okay.
Apologies for
Uh,
interruptions.
right. There's a comment from Anthony. I think this is Anthony Durham.
Yeah.
Place name considerations. Leicester's Roman name Ratis means raft in Latin. Knighton or similar occurs very commonly where a Roman road hit a river.
All right. Well, I didn't know that. From what I've read, rati is a Celtic word which has been Romanized, so it may not be exactly the same as the Latin there. The Knighton Brook has another name. It's called the Saffron Brook. I don't know if that helps at all there, but I didn't know any connection about Roman road. There's talk, and Margery quotes it in his book, that the road from Leicester to Lutterworth was Roman there. I don't think it is there, although there are some straight stretches. And oddly enough, when he gets to Baby, it points exactly to the middle of Leicester. So, as an alignment person, that's intriguing, but I still don't think it's Roman.
Okay. Question from Kim Humberstone.
Yes.
I think you've answered this actually. Was Cardyke in Lincolnshire a canal?
Ah, yeah. Well, no, uh, that's a matter of a debate, a serious debate.
Oh, right.
I think, yes, I think it was a catchment drain meant to take water flowing down from the Midlands in times of flood and getting it out to the Witham, the Welland, and the Nene. Nene at Peterborough, Welland at Spalding, or near Spalding, and the Witham near Boston there. But some people claim that it was a waterway to ship grain to the Roman army in the north there. I think one of the complications with the Cardyke, by the way, it is a superb engineering job. I mean, whoever did that he knew his biscuits there. It was terrific. But there are apparently original causeways across the Cardyke. Now, that would hinder it being a transport canal. It would hinder it being a drain as well. So I don't understand what that is. I'm not sure anybody does. But they appear to be original causeways. It wasn't some dumb farmer who stuck a road across later and didn't realise what he was doing. Uh, but the Cardyke is most impressive. It's huge.
Okay. From Peter Robinson. Did Roman canals conform to a standard design and dimensions?
Not as far as I know. The one that's just been found in the Netherlands is only half the width of what we've found with the raw dikes. So I doubt it. I think they'll be designed for a purpose.
Right. And finally, so far, Fiona Cope.
Oh, yes.
I'm interested.
I hope you know.
I'm interested about the lack of locks. Was this a later invention, and did the Romans just rely on gravity?
Um, well, gravity won't do you any harm if you're going to be on the level there. Um, where the people who I've come across most recently who believe there was a Roman lock are the people who've been at Piercebridge, Dave, which you may know more about than I do, because they think they've found a part of a Roman lock carrying the River Tees up to the Roman fort at Piercebridge. There, I don't believe that's what they found. I think they found a Victorian mill leat there, but I've only seen pictures. I've not seen it there myself. But
Yeah,
they believe that there was a lock there.
it's a very controversial subject at Piercebridge, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. But I think the general consensus is that the Romans didn't use locks there, and which is it raises that question mark: how did they get past the iron gates on the Danube? You know, I don't know how they did it. Possibly some inclined plane. You could run things down rails or something like that, possibly. But and far as I can find out, the only reference to that canal past the Iron Lakes is written. I don't think it's ever been found or excavated. So I think it's an unknown quantity.
Okay, okay. And that's all I've got, unless Susan has something to more to pass on to me.
All right.
There's just one comment which has come through. You may have
Yes.
seen it in the chat, but I've passed it through to you now
Oh
from
yes,
Ruth.
I've got that now. Thank you, Susan. It's from Ruth. Romans had locks, not the same swing locks as we think of today, but there are examples.
Ah. Oh, well,
Well, that's interesting.
I didn't know that. How do they work then?
I wonder because even a very small differential water level introduces a big loading on a
Yeah,
big area.
it does. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, you have a job holding it back. There used to be things called flash locks in the many British rivers, and that would hold the water back. And then when if somebody blew a whistle, they just lift the flash lock, and the boats were all poured down through the stream there, and it had to be tugged back as well against the current. But that was a pretty useless way of travelling.
mm, yeah.
The Stamford Canal was very early. I think that was about 1700 or even earlier, 16 something or other. And that had the locks that we know, the mitre locks, they're called. No, we have the lock gates open and close there. And that was very advanced, but I don't think he was copying any Roman precedents. I think that was just a local invention. It was very clever.
Mhm. I think we would be interested if Ruth's got some evidence for locks, if she could pass it on to
Yes.
us. That would be interesting.
Yes, yes. If it's been proven that they had locks, yeah. Whereabouts? Well, sorry. if if perhaps you can put me in touch, I'll be glad to chase that one up.
Yeah, well, if Ruth can pass it on to me, I can certainly circulate it to you, John,
Yes,
and anybody else who's interested.
yes. Thank you. Yes, yes. Again, I'm awfully sorry about the mix-ups. The reason why I was trying to work with another computer on the right was that I couldn't get a printout of my slides. Normally, I do get a printout and I work from the printout there, but I couldn't do it for some reason. In this latest version, I've got PowerPoint, it wouldn't print. So I had to run a separate version up there, and it kept skipping to the wrong slides.
You looked like you were looking for divine intervention there, John.
Well, I could have done with it.
Well, if that's it, it just remains for me to thank you for doing this talk for us this evening, John. I think everybody's enjoyed having it. I must thank the backroom team that we've got for doing the talks. These things wouldn't happen without them. But most of all, I must thank all those in the audience. We've had a big audience again, and it's very good that you support us with these things. We endeavour to put interesting talks on to keep your interest up as well. So thank you for those that have been with us. And our chairman has just butted in. So
I have, I'm afraid, yes, because while you've been talking, I've been doing some research. And apparently, you're going to like this, John, or not, I don't know. uh, Diodorus Siculus may have described the first pound lock known in history.
Ah,
And there's a quote here. I'm assuming this is what he says. At a later time, the second Ptolemy completed it, and in the most suitable spot constructed an ingenious kind of lock. This he opened whenever he wished to pass through, and quickly closed again, a contrivance whose usage proved to be highly successful. Sort of
ah,
sounds a bit like a
well,
pound lock without
yes,
the I've forgotten what they're called now at the bottom. What are they called?
sill.
Still,
Sorry?
Yeah, the sill. C-I-double-L, the sill.
Yes,
Well,
yes, yes.
yeah, what age?
So there we go. So maybe
Yes.
they did.
Yes. What period is that? About 100 AD?
Diodorus Siculus, off the top of my head, I think it's a little later, but I'm not exactly
Is he?
sure.
Ah, right.
I can check.
Yes. The big point about the Leicester Canal is that you didn't need a lock. That just holds the traffic up. If you can go there unhindered, then you're a lot better off there.
Here we go. No, you are correct. It was first century BC.
BC.
Mm.
Oh, right. Wow.
Yeah, and Siculus because he was from Sicily.
Ah, yes. All right.
So there you go.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks there. Yes. And I apologise to everybody for all the technical hitches. It's partly my ineptitude and partly for the fact that some things happened which I didn't know how to cope with.
okay. Well, again, thank you, John, for doing the talk for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. I just wanted to say something to what's left of the audience very quickly. Thanks, John. That was really great.
Sure.
I've been listening all the way through. Some of you will be aware that there has been a plan to build a huge solar farm right next to Richborough Roman Fort. I've actually been for the last 2 years part of the I wouldn't call it a battle, but the campaign to actually stop that from happening. I am very pleased to say that it was totally rejected by Dover District Council this evening. That's why I've been so tired, because I've been working on that, John. Yeah,
oh, well, congratulations.
It was unanimous. We expected it to get accepted, and they threw it out, which is absolutely brilliant news.
Oh,
So
yes,
just letting everyone know.
Okay, great. Well,
right, I'm going to go to bed now.
right. So I'll not thank John again for a third time, unless Mike's
that's fine, Dave. Thank you for the introduction and the patience.
But I will thank everybody else, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time for our next talk. So at that point, I'll close the line down. Thank you very much to everybody, and good night.
Do you want me to come back in again, Dave?
Yes, please, John.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave now and